this interview, I'm going to be speaking with General Sir Jim Hockenhull, Chief of Defence Intelligence, and we're going to be sharing the secrets of defence intelligence today for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. General, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today.
It's my pleasure.
Can I start by asking you just a little bit about your background and how you came to be involved in intelligence?
So I come from a naval family, and in a desperate act of rebellion, I had the option of becoming a punk rocker. That's how old I am. But instead, I just rebelled a bit and went into the army. My father was immensely disappointed. Firstly, that I wasn't joining the Royal Navy, and that was compounded by the fact that I became an officer, which he saw as people that didn't really do any real work from his own experience in the Royal Navy. But in 1982, which can only be described as a very long time ago, I went to Sandhurst and I was undecided over which part of the army I would like to join. And I attended a briefing on the course in 1982 by an Intelligence Corps colonel who came and spoke about the work the Intelligence Corps did, and it struck my interest. I then went away to university for 3 years, and during that time applied and was accepted by the Corps, then confirmed in post my commissioning course in 1985, and have served in the Intelligence Corps ever since.
So in this career thus far, have there been some particular highlights for you?
I think anyone that has a very long career, if there were too many lowlights, I think you'd end up not pursuing that career for too long. So actually, I think I've enjoyed, almost without exception, every job that I've done, both in intelligence work and in other disciplines during my time. But I think it's true for all servicemen and women that the ultimate satisfaction is when you're on operations. And I've been very lucky to be deployed in operations numerous times in Northern Ireland, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. So those operational experiences stand out. But probably I should also make clear how happy I am to be in my current role, to be the first ever intelligence career professional to fulfil the role of the Chief of Defence Intelligence is something I hold sort of great pride in, and being responsible for running defence intelligence is just an enormous privilege, and is also great fun.
So some people may not have heard of defence intelligence. So can you give us a little bit of an idea, what is it and when was it established?
So I agree. One of the reasons I'm really glad to be doing the interview is that there's a need for defence intelligence to raise its profile. Intelligence organisations, by their nature, tend to eschew publicity, but I think the defence intelligence might have taken that a little bit too far. So I'm glad of the opportunity. Defence intelligence was formed in 1964 by bringing together the three service intelligence branches and an organisation known as the Joint Intelligence Bureau, which was run by General Strong, who'd been Eisenhower's intelligence advisor during the Second World War. And in 1964, they brought those four organisations together to form Defence Intelligence. So Defence Intelligence is able to trace its sort of antecedents back into military, air, naval intelligence. And of course, from those beginnings also sprang MI5, MI6, and indeed the forerunners of the government Cypher School and GCHQ all can trace their way back. So although we have a range of different agencies today, they all come back to a kind of a common history. Military intelligence really dates from the sort of 1854 and the Crimean War, and sort of goes forward from there. But Defence Intelligence today is a different organisation to that from 1964. In 1964, it was really an organisation looking at bringing intelligence together to write reports on military matters, on science and technology, and some economic activity. But today, Defence Intelligence is an organisation of over 5,000 people looking at not just providing those all-source intelligence assessments, but also we run geospatial intelligence for the nation. We do it for all of government as well as meeting defence requirements. We also play a significant role in partnership with GCHQ in signals intelligence. We run a number of other intelligence disciplines which we coordinate as a whole. We also bring some coherence to the intelligence activity, the Army, Navy and Air Force, by trying to draw together what's going on inside the services into a sort of single intelligence enterprise across defence. And my responsibility, both as Chief of Defence Intelligence, is to run Defence Intelligence itself, but also to lead that enterprise across defence as well.
So it has a very good relationship, working relationship, because historically there have been some rivalry between the Admiralty and the Air Ministry, and particularly in the Second World War. So you would characterise this as being a very positive and close relationship with organisations, if I want to put it like that, within the United Kingdom?
I think inevitably in any set of relationships, and intelligence organisations are probably more predisposed to having frictional relationships than collaborative relationships, not least because of the compartmentalisation and the secrecy of work. But actually, at any time in my career, I think we're now at a sort of high point in terms of coordination and collaboration. I think it's really beneficial that as the Chief of Defence Intelligence, I've grown up with my Army, Navy, Air Force intelligence colleagues, but also with my colleagues across the agencies and indeed colleagues internationally who I know well. And so as a consequence, as a sort of professional intelligencer at the top of the organisation, I feel that I can provide a sort of an approach to leadership which is sort of collaborative and inclusive. I spoke of General Strong with his relationship with Eisenhower. There's an Eisenhower dictum which is, there's no end of the good you can do if you're willing to allow others to take the credit. And I try and live a little bit by that, of being willing to be a good team player and recognise that what we're seeking to do is to deliver impact on national security outcomes for the United Kingdom. It's not about people's vanity, whether that be personal or organisational. It must be that we have to be greater than the sum of our parts.
So in a sense, in terms of like recruitment of the women and men who work for Defence Intelligence, are there any particular characteristics that you would, obviously the team spirit and, not putting yourself and taking the credit, but would you have, there are other characteristics that you would think are particularly important for this job?
I think there are some which are sort of common to intelligence organisations writ large, but we have a really interesting mix of a team. So within our workforce, about 2/3 of them come as members of the military, but of course they come from all three services. So it's not a kind of uniform, though they may wear uniforms. It's not a uniform group. They come in different tribes. They come from different parts of the military. The majority come from intelligence disciplines, but I've also got Royal Engineer surveyors that are part of Defence Intelligence. I've got individuals from the Royal Signals and wide areas of the Army. So our military cohort is diverse in military terms. That's matched by 1/3 of our organisation largely being civil servants. And then we have some contractor support. And of course, we also have embedded a number of people from our international partners as well, which brings another level of diversity to our group. But across all of those people, I think there are some common themes. And what I'm really looking for is that sort of curiosity, that sort of that intellectual drive to want to understand, to go behind the superficial and truly seek to become expert, to be able to be professional to the utmost degree, to be able to provide the sort of the basis of that. They need the fire to want to be able to do that. It can't be just a job. They need to have a passion to want to do this work. And there's something about either individuals can come with that passion, or what I hope is that if they don't, that when we present them with opportunities, it lights that passion within them. It's so important that individuals are kind of motivated, and much of that motivation has to come from inside them, but we also need to match that by motivating them as well. What I would say as well, though, is that I really need the people that work in intelligence to be not just curious, but they need to be courageous. What they can't be is timid. They can't be timid in their analysis, timid in their views, timid in the way in which they communicate and disseminate their intelligence. It can't be timid in the sense of, well, on the one hand, but then on the other hand, when you're adding no real value to decision makers you're supporting. So there's something about being kind of intellectually courageous in this as well, and that takes confidence in your work. It takes professionalism, it takes the right education and training, but it also needs the right mindset of being able to want people to be bold. And that also means you have to accept that sometimes you won't get everything right. And I think that's one of the challenges in intelligence, that if people think they have to get everything right all of the time, it tends to limit their ambition. And I think we should be courageous in what we do. The last point I'd make, I think, is that I also need people to be really candid. We exist in a military organisation, the Ministry of Defence, and 2/3 of my people come from the uniformed services, and there tends to be that sort of hierarchical structure, which imposes sort of order, and the senior officer in the room has an opinion and everyone's expected to nod. I try and break that apart, firstly by making sure that what I say is never right, but also being open to challenge. But what I really need is I need people to be absolutely candid, both in terms of how they do their work, how they're collaborating, and candid in their views, and be willing to speak truth to power. And I think it's a really, really important element of an intelligence officer. Sometimes it's easier for an intelligence officer to do because you're sometimes slightly to one side of the command chain or the key decision makers, but you've got to use that opportunity. So to me, there's sort of curiosity, I think, is super important. I think being courageous is absolutely vital, and making sure that our people are candid in what they do. Those three. There'll be a host of other factors, but those three, I hope, give a kind of feel of what I'm looking for from people that work in the organisation, and of course the standards that I feel I have to live by and live up to as well.
So I suppose historically we think of intelligence as being potentially quite mundane. Some of the stuff that was particularly in the Second World War and the early Cold War. Would you describe it, do you think it's changed? I mean, what you're describing seems much more exciting than some of the what was perceived as laborious analysis in the past. Is that how you would perceive it, as a really actually exciting job?
Absolutely. I mean, I said earlier that I've had a very long and at times indistinguishable career. But in some of those jobs, in the early days of my career, I did some of those things. And I remember feeling just that I was kind of, I thought I must be contributing somehow. I don't quite understand how. And the value of the work I was doing, I thought was pretty low. So what we've tried to do, I think, is to do two things. One is about really prioritising what you do, and making sure that what it is that you're working on is designed for an outcome and an output. That idea of just sort of, storing or analysing data for the sake of it, there needs to be a purpose to what's being done. The second part, I think, is about using tools and technology to lift the burden of some of that work. So if we take one example, so in our geospatial work, you have the capacity to be able to examine hundreds, if not thousands, of images. And what we're really looking for in those images is what's changed. We've been able to develop processes whereby instead of having a human have to look at hundreds or thousands of images and discard 99% of them because nothing has changed, we're using technology to serve where that change has happened, present that to the analyst, so the analyst can then spend their time adding value rather than being a collator or a discriminator in that product. They can sit down with the one or the images which are important, and they can spend their time doing that. So I think what we do there is we improve our productivity, we improve our impact, but we also improve the quality of life for the individual that's doing the work, because they no longer feel that they're kind of wasting time. And there's a big operational difference as well, in that all those images might be available at 9 o'clock in the morning, But if it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon that you come across the one that really matters, then you've lost 4 hours. But in the circumstance that we are now, we're now increasingly able to serve those images up in a prioritized order, and so you need to look at these images first, and because we believe the tool, which of course needs to be checked by humans, but the analyst is able to address those at 9 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning or whenever the shift may start, which then gives us that sort of time advantage. And I think one of the big differences for us is not just that we're trying to remove the laborious burden of routine and rather dull work and move that away from people. What we're trying to be is have, if we go back to the sort of principles of intelligence of being both timely and accurate,
Yes.
This is a really important element of making sure that we're absolutely timely in what we do. I think it would be unforgivable to not be able to provide the timely advice, but to then find subsequently that we had that information available to us, we just hadn't found a way of getting round to looking at it in time. So that time element becomes really, really important. It has the benefit, I think, of making the work more interesting, and I think that's enabling our staff to not just do more interesting things, but also see the impact of what they're doing, and they're having real impact in terms of decision making. Both giving us operational advantage, but also making sure that we're protecting our servicemen and women wherever they're deployed.
So can you give me an idea? You've mentioned the geospatial work as an example. Are there other areas that you can talk about that Defence Intelligence would cover to give us an idea of the kind of things that the analysts and the operators will be involved in?
So certainly. So we have a very large team that do capability assessment. So these are individuals who are looking across the full range of military capability, and indeed some non-military capabilities, but which have military application. They do that in all domains, so cyber, space, air, land, maritime. They're looking at capabilities such as ballistic missile programs and trying to understand not just the threats now, but the threats into the future. That's designed to give us operational advantage in operations today, by ensuring that we've got the right countermeasures to some of those threats, but also where we've spotted vulnerabilities for us to be able to build capabilities to exploit those vulnerabilities, but also to be looking forward to see what our adversaries and potential adversaries may well have into the future, and thereby reducing our risk against our future equipment program as we look to spend taxpayers' money as wisely as we can in order to make sure that we're mitigating those threats into the future. And that's a large team. They work in partnership with other parts of the Ministry of Defence. They work with Defence Science and Technology laboratories. They work with international partners to try and make sure we're getting the very best insights. Some of those individuals have been working on these subjects for sort of 20, 30 years. They are acknowledged international experts. They will speak openly at conferences, perhaps not declaring themselves as being members of Defence Intelligence, but some really high quality individuals that have got deep expertise, incredible professional skill, which add real value, who are unique across the kind of United Kingdom intelligence community. One of the benefits we have in Defence Intelligence, perhaps in comparison to some other areas, is that we have the ability to keep some of our people on task on particular expertise for long durations. And that's one of the benefits of our mixed workforce, that my military cohort tend to move around on a sort of a routine posting cycle, perhaps every 3 years or so. But some of my civil servants are deep experts that have been sort of on particular missions and target sets, for a generation, and their expertise is absolutely invaluable.
Because you've mentioned our allies, the international perspective. So we have a very close relationship, do we, with Defence Intelligence with our allies? Do you want to comment on any aspect of that?
I think amongst your viewers, they'll have heard of the Yakuza Agreement from 1948 of the SIGINT partnership between the US and the UK, signed in the aftermath of the Second World War. But in 1964, with the creation of Defence Intelligence, there was a similar agreement between Defence Intelligence and our US partner, so the US Defence Intelligence Agency. But of course, it's more than that. It's also a sort of Five Eyes collaboration. So with our Australian, New Zealand and Canadian partners, and we have a really active programme, both of collaboration. I meet with my opposite numbers on a sort of steady drumbeat of occasions, and we meet in an annual conference, usually face to face in these times. It's not been quite like that for a short while, but we hope to be back to that soon. And that gives us the opportunity to work collaboratively, both in terms of big projects, also in terms of capabilities of things that we might need to develop our skills. We share our education and training materials and syllabus so we can learn from each other. And we also exchange personnel so that we'll embed people in with our Five Eyes partners to work collaboratively. But of course, it doesn't stop there. There are NATO partners. I spent 2 days last week in a NATO Military Intelligence Committee talking about how we can develop the NATO intelligence architecture. And then it goes beyond there. We have the Carrier Strike Group 21 deploying, as now deployed, and we'll travel out to the Far East. And we've got a range of partners out there that we work closely with, including Japan, South Korea. We have worked closely with our Indian partners. There are a range of others. So that sort of international element is hugely important. And part of that is about, it's not just because it's good to share and good to talk with others, but you get a diversity of view. We often talk about the very important elements of diversity and inclusion inside Defence Intelligence, about the makeup of our own staff and the need to make sure that we're reflective of the society and that we represent. But also there's a really important element of diversity of view, diversity of perspective, diversity of background. And we're able to do much of that, some by making sure we're appropriately addressing diversity and inclusion internally, but by engaging with our international partners, it also gives us another way of looking at things in a different way. Because often those who live close to a threat actor sometimes have a very different view. So as an example, we have a construct called the JEF, the Joint Expeditionary Force, which includes the UK and a number of Nordic and Baltic nations and some others. And it's fascinating when I go and speak to my Finnish opposite number, who has a very visceral understanding of the threat posed by Russia on the basis of both their history but also their proximity.
So are there any specific examples that you're allowed to talk about where Defence Intelligence has actually made a difference to a particular situation? I mean, you might just want to give me one example, but just to give us an idea of Defence Intelligence equals this on the ground kind of thing.
It's one of those slightly invidious questions of can you tell me of the secret things you've done, which we can then put on a website. So if I give you a historic view,
yes,
and I'll try and also give you a within the bounds of what I can say about what we do currently. So if we go back to the Falklands campaign, one of the major threats in the Falklands campaign was the deployment by the Argentinians of the Super Entente aircraft and Exocet missiles. And Defence Intelligence, through that capability assessment element that I spoke to earlier and the contribution it makes, the forerunner of that organisation played an absolutely vital role in ensuring that no more Exocet missiles were able to be acquired by the Argentinian military, which if they had been able to acquire more missiles, it would have posed an even greater threat to the task force in the South Atlantic. So sometimes it can be analysis and assessment which is having an impact on the battlefield, but doing so through a slightly articulated route rather than something direct to the task force on the ground. And I think that's an example of where Defence Intelligence was able to bring together a range of its different capabilities and skills to provide the intelligence that was necessary to be able to stop that flow of missiles. Bringing it perhaps more up to date, we saw activity in the media reported the activity by Russia in Crimea and also on the Ukrainian border. And Defence Intelligence played a critical role in being able to observe what was going on the ground, to be able to use the deep expertise that I spoke to earlier, to be able to draw conclusions from what was being seen in order to then present decision makers with a clearer understanding of both what was happening on the ground and what we thought it meant. So from the Falklands in '82 right through to today, it plays a vital role. But I'd also highlight that we do some non-traditional things. So Defence Intelligence has played, I think, a spectacularly important role in the battle against COVID. As we went into COVID, we had the only medical intelligence capability that was standing. We'd resourced that off the back of the Ebola crisis that we faced a few years ago, but we were then able to bolster our medical intelligence capability, not just with people who truly understood sort of medical challenges and things directly linked, but we took one of my scientists who spends his day job as a modeler of ballistic missiles, and we made him a modeler over how the disease was replicating in overseas countries in order that we had a model that we could use. So, and a range of others coming together from across the sort of multidisciplinary skill of Defence Intelligence to have impact. And of course, it's entirely right and proper that at the time of national crisis that everyone does everything they possibly can. And I'm really proud that Defence Intelligence has been able to play a small part in that effort. But the small part that it played was often to give insights to decision makers which they wouldn't have been able to have had we not had the Defence Intelligence capabilities to deliver it to them.
So it's very versatile, isn't it, actually, and transferable skills, which is interesting in itself. So do you think there's an area of Defence Intelligence that you'd like to see under its umbrella in terms of its work that it doesn't currently do? Or do you think that it's pretty much a full-bodied organisation that you're happy with in that sense, in terms of its work and parameters?
That almost feels like a sort of how much of a megalomaniac are you type question. So there are different models. In other countries that I go to, the Defence Intelligence Organisation might also own responsibility for a range of other elements which in the United Kingdom may be delivered by other agencies. I think the UK setup works for us. I think it works pretty well. But the one thing I am seeking to do is to bring greater coherence to the defence element of the intelligence community. Historically, Defence Intelligence as a sort of central organisation has stood, and then the Army, Navy and Air Force go off and do their own intelligence, and there's been an umbilical cord back to Defence Intelligence, but that cord may be a bit thin and not necessarily always seen as particularly important. So the change I'm hoping to make, or the change we are making, is to really move from a kind of federated model into something which is much more closely coordinated. That's not to say centralised. It's not about only serving the needs of Defence Intelligence, but we need to bring all of that effort of the Army, Navy, Air Force, regulars and reserves, as well as the capabilities that I control within Defence Intelligence, to bring that into a much more coherent enterprise, which is able to much more actively support whoever has the priority at the time. And that might be an air operation somewhere, or a land operation, or it might be the carrier strike group, or it might be something that we're dealing with in Defence Intelligence. But there's a power that comes as a consequence of bringing those disparate elements together. And I hope that comes to everybody's advantage rather than just serving the megalomaniac that sits at the centre of it. The second thing I'd say is really it's about a sort of technical area. or the development of a new area. So our exploitation of open source intelligence is a really burgeoning area of activity for us, and I think that's something where we're having to we're doing a lot of learning by doing, and I remain convinced that a vast amount of our understanding can be generated through accessing publicly available information. And we're on a journey to go and do that. I think historically people have rather overprivileged secret and top secret information, and if it is top secret, then it must be very important and it must be believable. Actually, that sometimes can be true and sometimes may not be true. So what I want to do is to provide the broadest contextual understanding possible. I think much of that will come from open source intelligence or publicly available information, over which we can then drape our secret and top secret intelligence. And I think that will give a kind of richer, deeper picture as a consequence. So I hope that we're going to change. What that also may mean is that we can become somewhat more open in terms of how we share our information and our understanding, because if we have that information derived at the stage we stop at what we've generated from publicly available information, then I'd be looking to kind of share that and engage, because I want to engage not just with defence partners but with academia, but also going back to one of the points you made at the very beginning of this, that we're an organisation that perhaps doesn't have the profile of some others, and perhaps that's something, certainly it's something that I think we need to address. One way of doing that is not just to sort of beat your chest and say, you know, we're a great organisation, look at us, but actually it's to contribute to public debate and be recognised as an organisation that provides a sort of expert contribution into that national debate.
So you've given us a picture, I guess, of how defence intelligence has had to change. I mean, the threats, of course, are changing. We now live in such a global technological world and the space programs and stuff like that. But do you think there are principles of intelligence which remain the same?
If we think about warfare, and I think the way in which that's characterised is that the character of warfare can change, but the nature of it remains constant. And I think in intelligence, I think that's also similar. The character of it is changing as we speak. The impact of challenges in cyberspace, the exploitation of space, a whole range of different challenges, not just that those happening in individual domains, but the way in which those domains are combining to provide challenge, means that the character of what we do, I think, changes significantly. And I would say that for the UK, we are on the integrated review, and the recent Defence Command paper is talking about a more global Britain. We're also talking about operating above and below the threshold of conflict, and we're talking about the impact of technology. So what that means for me as the Chief of Defence Intelligence is we're going to be asked to do things more broadly across the globe. We're going to have to understand in greater depth and greater complexity, both above and below the threshold of conflict, and we're going to have to do all that faster. So I need to go wider and deeper and quicker, and that's a really difficult challenge. So that means that the idea that the way in which we do intelligence it can stay the same, I think that's for the birds, and we need to recognise that we are going to have to change. But there are some things that remain kind of in the true nature of intelligence, I think, remain the same. The requirement for sort of independence and objectivity, the need for professionalism and accuracy, the willingness to speak truth to power, to be reliable, to be credible, to be trusted. All of those things, I think, are really important, and that's at both an organisational level and an individual level. So the reputation of defence intelligence is built up, I think, as a consequence of the reputation of all the people that are in the organisation now and all those that have gone before, and those that have like me, that have the sort of temporary custodianship of the organisation for a brief period of time, to be hopefully not forgotten immediately afterwards, but to just sort of blend into the history of defence intelligence. Our job is to make it as relevant and as impactful as it can be today. We need to prepare for the future, but we also need to remember where we've come from. And through remembering where we've come from, I think that sets the standards and the sort of enduring principles.
I've got a final question, if I may, and that's about any aspiring women and men who would like to do this kind of stuff. If they've heard this video podcast and thought, oh, you know what, that sounds fascinating. What would be your inspirational message to them?
I think there's something around making a contribution. There are some people in life who are happy to watch what's going on, and to occasionally take part, and that satisfies them and they're happy. And for those people, I think that's great. But there's another group of people who want to make a difference, who want to have an impact, who want to do something in the service of others, who want to serve the needs of their nation, and make sure that we keep our nation safe and prosperous. And in operating in defence intelligence, serving in the intelligence community across defence, whether that be in uniform in the Army, Navy, Air Force, or the civil servants that work in defence intelligence, I think they have an enormous opportunity to make a massive contribution. And I think there's that sort of moment that sort of we all face every day when we're stood in front of a mirror, whether we're sort of cleaning our teeth or brushing our hair. And I think there's a moment where you need to kind of look yourself in the eyes and say, but is the thing I'm doing really worthwhile? Am I making the most of the opportunity that I've got and the time that I've got to make that contribution? And I would say to the people that work for me, the answer that I hope all of them can give is absolutely. And they're making a real difference. They're having an enormous impact. They're keeping our country safe. And they're also doing a job which is amazingly interesting. I think in many of the many moments in my career that I've just felt privileged to be doing what I do. And the only thing I'm sure about the future is that I'm really going to miss it when I'm not doing it. And I would say to anybody that's thinking about how they can make a contribution, I can think of no sort of finer calling than coming in and adding their weight to the effort that we collectively make. The sad thing is that they'll never be able to tell anyone what it is they do, but also the sort of people that we've got are the people that have that sort of reflection inwards and are satisfied by having inner contentment rather than external adulation. So if you fit that bill of someone that's desperate to make a contribution, that's got skills and intellect to offer to us, we can help you harness that. And I hope that what will end up is some really happy and contented individuals that have made a contribution to our nation's safety, and that they can go away with a sort of a warm glow that they've really done something that matters, and that they can take enormous pride in.
General Sir Jim Hockenhull, thank you. It's been a real privilege to be able to interview you today. Thank you so much for doing this.
Helen, thank you.
This has been a production for the National Centre for Military Intelligence. To find out more and to support the NCMI, please visit ncmi.co.uk.